All right. So here we are again, reading for it's been a while actually. Man, it's been a while. So once again, I am reading in order. I'm going live reading, so as to stay on task and complete my reading by tricking myself into feeling like I'm reading to somebody. Here we go again. So I guess just before I begin, point of clarification. I'm like in a reading group and I'm trying to make sure that I stay up on the reading. And so, and I struggle with like staying on top of basically everything I need to do in my life. So this is the technique that I'm using to try to stay focused, basically. So yeah, that's what it's all about. So like that's why, for instance, I'm reading all this Marxist literature because that's the theme of the reading group. I do find it personally interesting, though I'm like, I don't know how much longer I'll probably be doing this. I kind of like the idea of trying to continue to do like live streams reading stuff, but not sure. Especially since like, I don't know, like I saw like one person actually commented on one of my videos and actually seemed to like it. And I was like, oh, how cool. Oh, that's neat. But I like not really doing that for that purpose. Though if I continue doing this, maybe we'll see. Maybe maybe I will actually like think about the fact that there's maybe some people that actually like what I'm doing. But for now, I'm going to ignore the fact that apparently like at least one person kind of likes these things. Let's go ahead and get into the reading. So this is Rosa Luxemburg's The Mass Strike, the Political Party and Trade Unions. It was written in 1906, published by the Marxist Educational Society of Detroit in 1925. Translated, or this specific version that I am reading was published by the Marxist Educational Society of Detroit, 1925. Though it is on a website. And it was translated by Patrick Levin. I don't know why I'm reading all this, but I guess I'm going to keep going. Online, this is an online version from the Rosa Luxemburg Internet Archive from Marxist.org, 1999. Transcription, markup, A. Lehrer. Not sure how to pronounce this person's last name. I'm doing a terrible job of it, but okay. Anyways, let's get started and see how it goes. See how it goes. Hold on. Yeah, that's good. All right, so part 1, the Russian Revolution, anarchism, and the general strike. Almost all works and pronouncements of international socialism on the subject of the mass strike date from the time before the Russian Revolution of 1905. The first historical experience on a very large scale with the means of struggle. It is therefore evident that they are, for the most part, out of date. Their standpoint is essentially that of Engels, who in 1873 wrote as follows in his criticism of the revolutionary blundering of the Bakunists in Spain. The general strike in the Bakunist program is the lever which will be used for introducing the social revolution. One fine morning, all the workers in every industry in a country, or perhaps in every country, will cease work and thereby compel the ruling class either to submit in about 4 weeks or to launch an attack on the workers so that the latter will have the right to defend themselves and may use the opportunity to overthrow the old society. The proposal is by no means new. French and Belgian socialists have paraded it continually since 1848. But for all that is of English origin. During the rapid and powerful development of Chartism, this almost seemed like it said Christianity or Christianism. This is a very weird mistake. During the rapid and powerful development of Chartism among the English workers that followed the crisis of 1837, the Holy Month, a suspension of work on a national scale, was preached as early as 1839 and was received with such favor that in July 1842, the factory workers of the north of England attempted to carry it out. And at the Congress of the Alliancists at Geneva on September 1st, 1873, the general strike played a great part, but it was admitted on all sides to carry it out was necessary. Hold on. But at the Congress of the Alliancists at Geneva on September 1st, 1873, the general strike played a great part, but it was admitted on all sides to carry it out. The general strike played a great part, but it was admitted on all sides to carry it out was necessary to have a perfect organization of the working class and a full war chest. And that is the crux of the question. On the one hand, the governments, especially if they are encouraged by the workers' abstention from political action, will never allow the funds of the workers to become large enough. And on the other hand, political events and the encroachments of the ruling class will bring about the liberation of the workers long before the proletariat gets the length of forming this ideal organization and this colossal reserve fund. But if they had these, they would not need to make use of the roundabout way of the general strike in order to obtain their object. Here we have the reasoning that was characteristic of the attitude of international social democracy towards the mass strike in the following decades. It is based on the anarchist theory of the general strike. That is, here we have the reasoning that was characteristic of the attitude of international social democracy towards the mass strike in the following decades. It is based on the anarchist theory of the general strike, that is, the theory of the general strike as a means of inaugurating the social revolution, in contradistinction to the daily political struggle of the working class, and exhausts itself in the following simple dilemma. Either the proletariat as a whole are not yet in possession of the powerful organization and financial resources required, in which case they cannot carry through the general strike, or they are already sufficiently organized, in which case they do not need the general strike. This reasoning is so simple and at first glance so irrefutable that for a quarter of a century it has rendered excellent service to the modern labor movement as a logical weapon against the anarchist phantom and as a means of carrying out the idea of political struggle in the widest circles of the workers. The enormous strides taken by the labor movement in all capitalist countries during the last 25 years are the most convincing evidence of the value of the tactics of political struggle, which were insisted upon by Marx and Engels in opposition to Bakunism. The German social democracy, in its position of vanguard of the entire international labor movement, is not in the least the direct product of the consistent and energetic application of these tactics. Hold on. I'm just going to reread this part. The enormous strides taken by the labor movement in all capitalist countries during the last 25 years are the most convincing evidence of the value of the tactics of political struggle, which were insisted upon by Marx and Engels in opposition to Bakunism, and German social democracy in its position of vanguard of the entire international labor movement. It is not the least the direct... hold on. And German social democracy, in its position of vanguard of the entire international labor movement, is not in the least the direct product of the consistent and energetic application of these tactics. Okay, yeah, of the tactics. The value of the tactics of political struggle, which were insisted upon by Marx and Engels in opposition to Bakunism. Yeah. The 1905 Russian Revolution has now effected a radical revision of the above piece of reasoning. For the first time in history, class struggle it has achieved for the first time in the history of the class struggle, it has achieved a grandiose realization of the idea of the mass strike, and as we shall discuss later, has even matured the general strike and thereby opened a new epoch in the development of the labor movement. Excuse me. It does not, of course, follow from this that the tactics of political struggle recommended by Marx and Engels were false, or that criticism applied by them to anarchism was incorrect. On the contrary, in the same train of ideas, the same method, the Engels Marxian tactics, which lay the foundation of the previous practice of the German social democracy, which now in the Russian Revolution are producing new factors and new conditions in the class struggle. I read that weird. I keep doing this. I keep reading it weird. Let's try this again. So what happened in Russia doesn't necessarily imply that the tactics for political struggle recommended by Marx and Engels were false, or that criticism applied by them to anarchism was incorrect. On the contrary, it is the same train of ideas, the same method, the Engels Marxian tactics, which lay at the foundation of the previous practice of the German social democracy, and which now in the Russian Revolution are producing new factors and new conditions in the class struggle. The Russian Revolution, which is the first historical experiment on the model of the class strike, not merely does not afford a vindication of anarchism, but actually means the historical liquidation of anarchism. The sorry existence to which this mental tendency was condemned in recent decades by the powerful development of social democracy in Germany may, to a certain extent, be explained by the exclusive domination and long duration of the parliamentary period. A tendency patterned entirely upon the first blow and direct action, a tendency revolutionary in the most naked pitchfork sense, can only temporarily languish in the calm of parliamentarian day, parliamentarian day, and on a return of the period of direct open struggle, can come to life again and unfold its inherent strength. Mm, interesting. Russia, in a particular, appeared to have become the experimental field for the heroic deeds of anarchism. A country in which the proletariat had absolutely no political rights and extremely weak organizations, a many-colored complex of various sections of the population, chaos of conflicting interests, a low standard of education amongst the masses of the people, extreme brutality in the use of violence on the part of the prevailing regime. All this seemed as if created to raise anarchism to a sudden, if perhaps short-lived power. And finally, Russia was the historical birthplace of anarchism, but the fatherland of Bakunin was to become the burial place of his teachings. Not only did and do the anarchists in Russia not stand at the head of the mass strike movement, not only does the whole political leadership of revolutionary action and also the mass strike lie in the hands of the social democratic organizations, which are bitterly opposed to bourgeois parties by Russian anarchists, are partly in the hands of such socialist organizations as are more or less influenced by the social democracy and more or less approximate to it, such as the Terrorist Party, the Socialist Revolutionaries. But the anarchists simply do not exist as a serious political tendency in the Russian Revolution. Only in a small Lithuanian town with particularly difficult conditions, a confused medley of different nationalities among the workers, an extremely scattered condition of small-scale industry, a very severely oppressed proletariat, in Białystok, there's amongst the 7 or 8 different revolutionary groups a handful of half-grown anarchists who promote confusion and bewilderment amongst the workers to the best ability. And lastly, in Moscow and perhaps in 2 or 3 other towns, a handful of people of this make themselves noticeable. But apart from these few revolutionary groups, what is the actual role of anarchism in the Russian Revolution? It has become the sign of the common thief and plunderer. A large proportion of the innumerable thefts and acts of plunder of private persons are carried out under the name of anarchist communism. Acts which raise up like a troubled wave against the revolution in every period of depression and in every period of temporary defense. Anarchism has become, in the Russian Revolution, not the theory of the struggling proletariat, but the ideological signboard of the counter-revolutionary lumpenproletariat, who, like a school of sharks, swarm in the wake of the battleship of the revolution. And therewith the historical career of anarchism is well nigh ended. On the other hand, the mass strike in Russia has been realized not as a means of evading the political struggle of the working class, and especially parliamentarianism, not as a means of jumping suddenly into the social revolution by means of a theatrical coup, but as means, firstly, of creating for the proletariat the conditions of the daily political struggle and especially of parliamentarianism. The revolutionary struggle in Russia, in which mass strikes are the most important weapon, is, by the working class, and above all the proletariat, conducted for those political rights and conditions whose necessity and importance in the struggle for the emancipation of the working class Marx and Engels first pointed out, and in opposition to anarchism fought for with all their might in the International. Thus, the historical dialectics, the rock on which the whole teaching of Marxian socialism rests, brought it about that today anarchism, with which the idea of the mass strike is indissolubly associated, has itself come to be opposed to the mass strike, which was combated as the opposite of the political activity of the proletariat. Appears today as the most powerful weapon of the struggle for political rights. Okay, hold on. I need to read that sentence one more time. Thus has historical dialectics, the rock on which the whole teaching of Marxian socialism rests, brought it about that today anarchism, with which the idea of mass strike is indissolubly associated, has itself come to be opposed to the mass strike, which was combated as the opposite of the political activity of the proletariat. Appears today as the most powerful weapon of the struggle for political rights. If, therefore, the Russian Revolution makes imperative a fundamental revision of the old standpoint of Marxism on the question of the mass strike, it is once again Marxism whose general method and points of view have thereby in new form carried off the prize. The Moors, beloved, can die only by the hand of the Moor. Interesting. Definitely some interesting words in critique of anarchism. I'm sure that Marx and Engels themselves had a much more thorough critique of anarchism in their arguments with Bakunin. It's funny, I actually know some anarchists who like wrote a paper on like, oh, Bakunin was cool. I don't remember. I think I've read that paper, but it's been a long time. I don't really talk to this friend a whole lot anymore. Not for political reasons. Although he used to like be like, whoa, really respect me as an anarchist or whatever I was. So interesting. Anyway. Part 2, the mass strike, a historical and not an artificial product. Right, we got that historical dialectic going on, you know? We've got conditions of possibility for the eruption of historical events, right? One second, I will be right back. Let's see here. Hold on. All right. Rosa Luxemburg. I don't need to read that part. The mass strike and historical and not an artificial product. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Sorry, I can't. Oh man. Okay. Okay. Let's concentrate. Oh. The first revision of the question of the mass strike, which results from the experience of Russia, relates to the general conception of the problem. Till the present time, the zealous advocates of an attempt with the mass strike in Germany of the stamp of Bernstein, Eisner, etc., and also the strongest opponents of such an attempt, as represented in the trade union camp by, for example, Bommelberg, stand when all is said and done on the same conception, and that is the anarchist one. The apparent polar opposites do not mutually exclude each other, but, as always, condition and at the same time supplement each other. For the anarchist mode of thought is direct speculation on the great Okay, I'm sorry. I have to find out what this word means. I have to find out what this word means. Oh my god. What is it? Google search clatter. Oh, cladderadatsch. Oh, Jesus. It means chaos. It means crash. It means. So that makes sense. To this day, I feel like that's a part of like anarchist mythology and cosmology. Like, excuse me, there is like I feel like there is a kind of like idealization of a period of great like of like momentous upheaval and chaos, that but like carnival-esque, where the people can sort of like free themselves and overthrow and whatever. I mean, like, but it's stupid today, I think, in a lot of ways. Only because for a lot of different reasons, actually. But like the biggest one being that like today actual conflict with the state, I think, in the way that people sometimes idealize it, like I just don't know. I don't know. I don't feel like people aren't organized enough, and the state's monopoly on violence and techniques of violence and techniques of enforcement are just so advanced. I don't know. It seems the idealization on a state of like chaotic and violent upheaval is, I think, a little bit. It's definitely not a little bit. It's definitely misplaced. Is it possible to have like strategic moment of like violent upheaval? I think, yeah, absolutely. But the conditions, the location, the conditions, a lot of different stuff a lot of different stuff factors into making that an actually like useful or practical event, I think. Let's see here. Let's get back to the reading. For the anarchist mode of thought is direct speculation on the great chaos. clatter and on the social revolution merely as an external and inessential characteristic. According to it, what is essential is the whole abstract, unholy view of the mass strike. Unholy. Where did I get those words from? That's crazy. Oh, because I got holy. Essential is the whole abstract, unhistorical. I can kind of see where I got interesting. That's like a really weird. That's really it's really weird. Anyway, according to it, what is essential is the whole abstract, unhistorical view of the mass strike and of all conditions of the proletarian struggle generally. For the anarchist, there exist only two things as material suppositions of his revolutionary speculations. First, imagination, and second, goodwill and courage, right? First, imagination, and second, goodwill and courage to rescue humanity from the existing capitalist vale of tears. This fanciful mode of reasoning 60 years ago gave the result that the mass strike was the shortest, surest, and easiest means of springing into the better social future. The same mode of reasoning recently gave the result that the trade union struggle was the only real direct action of the masses and also the only real revolutionary struggle, which, as is well known, is the latest notion of the French and Italian syndicalists. The fatal thing for anarchism has always been that the methods of struggle improvised in the air were not only a reckoning without their host, that is, they were purely utopian, but that they, while not reckoning in the least with the despised evil reality, unexpectedly became in this evil reality practical helps to the reaction where previously they had only been for the most part. Oh my god, that is the most frustrating looking sentence. Let's do this again. The fatal thing for anarchism has always been that the methods of struggle improvised in the air were not only a reckoning without their host, that is, they were purely utopian, but that they, while not reckoning in the least with the despised evil reality, unexpectedly became in this evil reality. Practical helps to the reaction where previously they had only been, for the most part, revolutionary speculations. Let's rearrange this sentence. I am struggling here. The fatal thing for anarchism has always been that the methods of struggle improvised in the air were not only a reckoning with their host, but that they unexpectedly became, that they, while not reckoning in the least with the despised evil reality, unexpectedly became in this evil reality practical helps to the reaction, where previously they had only been, for the most part, revolutionary speculation. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm very confused at the sentence. Very confused about the sentence. Copying it down, not because I have any like particular questions, but just because I don't know what I'm reading. I am struggling understanding what I am looking at when I look at the sentence. On the same ground of abstract, unhistorical methods of observation stand those today who would, in the manner of a board of directors, put the mass strike in Germany on calendar of an appointed day, and those who, like the participants in the Trade Union Congress in Cologne, would, by a prohibition of propaganda, eliminate the problem of the mass strike from the face of the earth. I'm going to read that one more time. In the same ground of abstract, unhistorical methods of in the same ground of abstract, unhistorical methods of observation, stand those today who would, in the manner of a board of directors, put the mass strike in Germany on the calendar of an appointed day. And those who, like the participants in the Trade Union Congress at Cologne, would, by a prohibition of propaganda, eliminate the problem of the mass strike from the face of the earth. Both tendencies proceed on the common, purely anarchistic assumption that the mass strike is a purely technical means of struggle which can be decided at their pleasure and strictly according to conscience, or forbidden, a kind of pocket knife which can be kept in the pocket, clasped, ready for any emergency, and according to the decision can be unclasped and used. The opponents of the mass strike do indeed claim for themselves the merit of taking into consideration the historical groundwork and the material conditions of the present conditions in Germany, in opposition to the revolutionary romanticists who hover in the air and do not at any point reckon with the hard realities and the possibilities and impossibilities. Facts and figures, they cry, like Mr. Gradgrind in Dickens' Hard Times. But the trade union opponent of the mass strike understands by the historical basis and material conditions is two things. On the one hand, the weakness of the proletariat, and on the other hand, the strength of the Prussian-German militarism. The inadequate organization of the workers and the imposing Prussian bayonet. These are the facts and figures upon which the trade union leaders base their practical policy in the given case. Now, it is quite true that the trade union cash box and the Prussian bayonet are material and very historical phenomena. But the conception based upon them is not historical materialism in Marx's sense, but a policeman-like materialism in the sense of Puttkamer. Let me reread this. I definitely would like to reread this. No, it is quite true that the trade union cash box and the Prussian bayonet are material and very historical phenomena, but the conception based upon them is not historical materialism in Marx's sense, but a policeman-like materialism in the sense of Puttkamer. Okay. The representatives of the capitalist police state reckon on much, and indeed exclusively, with the occasional real power of the organized proletariat, as well as with the material might of the bayonet. And from the comparative example of these two row of figures, and the comforting conclusion is always drawn that the revolutionary labor movement is produced by individual demagogues and agitators, and that therefore there is in the prisons and bayonets an adequate means of subduing the unpleasant passing phenomena. The class-conscious German workers have at last grasped the humor of the policeman-like theory that the whole modern labor movement is an artificial, arbitrary product of a handful of conscienceless demagogues and agitators. It is exactly the same conception, however, that finds expression when two or three worthy comrades unite in a voluntary column of night watchmen in order to warn the German working class against the dangerous agitation of a few revolutionary romanticists and their propaganda of the mass strike. Or when, on the other hand, a noisy indignation campaign is engineered by those who, by means of confidential agreements between the executive of the party and the General Commission of the trade unions, believe they can prevent the outbreak of the mass strike in Germany. If it depends on the inflammatory propaganda of revolutionary romanticists, or on confidential or public decisions of the party direction, then we should not even yet have had in Russia a single serious mass strike. In no country in the world, as I pointed out in March 1905 in the Sachsich Arbeitszeitung, was the mass strike so little propagated or even discussed as in Russia. And the isolated examples of decisions and agreements of the Russian party executive, which really sought to proclaim the mass strike of their own accord, as for example the last attempt in August of this year after the dissolution of the Duma, are almost valueless. I'm struggling to grasp the content of that paragraph. Like, what did I just read? If it depended on the inflammatory propaganda of revolutionary romanticists or on confidential or public decisions of the party direction, then we should not even yet have had in Russia a single serious mass strike. I see. In no country in the world, as I pointed out on March 15th, 2005, as I pointed out in March 1905 in blah, 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 at no point in the world was the mass strike so little propagated or even discussed as in Russia. And the isolated examples of decisions and agreements of the Russian party executive, which really sought to proclaim the mass strike of their own accord, as, for example, the last attempt in August of the year after the dissolution of the Duma, are almost valueless. If, therefore, the Russian Revolution teaches us anything, it teaches above all that the mass strike is not artificially made or decided at random, not propagated, but that it is a historical phenomenon that at a given moment results from social conditions with historical inevitability. It is not, therefore, by abstract speculations on the possibility or impossibility, the utility or the injuriousness of the mass strike, but only by examination of those factors and social conditions out of which the mass strike grows in the present phase of the class struggle. In other words, it is not by subjective criticism of the mass strike from the standpoint of what is desirable, but only by objective investigation of the sources of the mass strike from the standpoint of what is historically inevitable, that the problem can be grasped or even discussed. In the unreal sphere of abstract logical analysis, it can be shown that with exactly the same force on either side, that the mass strike is absolutely impossible and sure to be defeated, and that it is possible and that its triumph cannot be questioned. And therefore, the value of the evidence led on each side is exactly the same, and that is nil. Therefore, the fear of the propagation of the mass strike, which has even led to formal anathemas against the persons alleged to be guilty of this crime, is solely the product of the droll confusion of persons. It is just as impossible to propagate the mass strike as an abstract means of struggle as it is to propagate the revolution. Revolution, like mass strike, signifies nothing but an external form of the class struggle, which can have sense and meaning only in connection with the definite political situations. If anyone were to undertake to make the mass strike, to make the mass strike generally as a form of proletarian action, if anyone were to undertake to make the mass strike generally as a form of proletarian action, the object of methodological agitation and to go house to house canvassing this idea in order to gradually win the working class to it, it would be as idle and profitless and absurd an occupation as it would be to seek to make the idea of the revolution or of the fight at the barricades the object of a special agitation. The mass strike has now become the center of the lively interest of the German and the international working class because it is a new form of struggle, and as such, it is the sure symptom of a thoroughgoing internal revolution in the relations of the classes and in the conditions of the class struggle. It is a testimony to the sound revolutionary instinct and to the quick intelligence of the mass of the German proletariat that, in spite of the obstinate resistance of the trade union leaders, they are applying themselves to this new problem with such keen interest. But it does not meet the case in the presence of this interest and of this fine intellectual thirst and desire for revolutionary deeds on the part of the workers to treat them to abstract mental gymnastics on the possibility or impossibility of the mass strike. They should be enlightened on the development of the Russian Revolution, the international significance of that revolution, the sharpening of class antagonisms in Western Europe, the wider political perspectives of the class struggle in Germany, and the role of the task of the masses in the coming struggles. Only in this form will the discussion on the mass strike lead to the widening of the intellectual horizon of the proletariat, to the sharpening of their way of thinking, and the steeling of their energy. I'm going to read that one more time. But it does not meet the case in the presence of this interest and of this fine intellectual thirst and desire for revolutionary deeds on the part of the workers to treat them to abstract mental gymnastics on the possibility or impossibility of the mass strike. They should be enlightened on the development of the Russian Revolution and the international significance of that revolution, the sharpening of class antagonisms in Western Europe, the wider political perspectives of the class struggle in Germany, and the role and tasks of the masses in the coming struggle. Let me look at that one sentence again. They should be enlightened. So instead of being like, this is how you could do a mass strike, this is how you couldn't do a mass strike, what would be much more useful is for them to be enlightened on the how did the Russian Revolution come about, the international significance of that revolution, the sharpening of class, talk about the sharpening of class antagonisms in Western Europe, the wider political perspectives of the class struggle in Germany, and the role and the task of the masses in the coming struggles. Right. Okay. Viewed from this standpoint, however, the criminal proceedings desired by the enemies of revolutionary romanticism appear in all their absurdity because, in treating of the problem, one does not adhere strictly to the text of the Jena resolution. The practical politicians agree to this resolution if need be, because they couple the mass strike chiefly with the fate of universal suffrage, from which it follows that they can believe in two things. First, that the mass strike is of a purely defensive character, and second, that the mass strike is even subordinate to parliamentarism. I'm gonna reread this paragraph. Viewed from this standpoint, however, the criminal proceedings desired by the enemies of revolutionary romanticism appear in all their absurdity, because in treating the problem, one does not adhere strictly to the text of the Jena resolution. I do not know what that is. The practical politicians agree to this resolution, if need be, because they couple the mass strike chiefly with the fate of universal suffrage, from which it follows that they can believe in two things. First, that the mass strike is of a purely defensive character. And second, that the mass strike is even subordinate to parliamentarism. That is, has been turned into a mere appendage of parliamentarism. But the real kernel of the Jena resolution in this connection is that in the present position of Germany and attempt on the part of the prevailing reaction to the parliamentary vote would in all probability be the moment for the introduction of and the signal for a period of stormy political struggles in which the mass strikes as a means of a struggle in Germany might well come into use for the first time. But to seek to narrow and to artificially smother the social importance and to limit the historical scope of the mass strike as a phenomena and as a problem of the class struggle by the wording of a Congress resolution is an undertaking which, for short-sightedness, can only be compared with the veto on discussion of the Trade Union Congress in Cologne. In the resolution of the Jena Congress, German social democracy has officially taken notice of the fundamental change which the Russian Revolution of 1905 has effected for a revolutionary development and its power of adaptability to the new demands of the coming phase of the class struggle. Therein lies the significance of the Jena Resolution. As for the peaceful application of the mass strike in Germany, history will decide that as it decides in Russia. History in which German social democracy, with its decisions, it is true an important factor, but at the same time, only one factor amongst many. Oh, this is a really long one. Development of the mass strike movement in Russia. Okay, interesting. So here we are getting into the actual, how did we get here? Which is cool. I will be right back. All right, so one second. Yeah, I'm gonna have some tacos later. It's in the vegan district over in Buena Park near Knox. That's why. So Bethlehem showed it to me. Oh, it's so good. My fiance's sister just gave me some bomb ass vegan chicken Chinese food, and like I've got to. Oh man, don't look at me while I'm eating. I just. I'm not even gonna say it. But yeah. Oh my goodness. 1 second. I'm still live streaming.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize because you room and stuff.
Because what?
Because you came into the room and stuff, so I wasn't sure what you were doing. I'm gonna do a bite of this.
It's really good. We need to go get some vegan Chinese food. We gotta do that soon. We gotta do it soon. Yes, I'm down.
Okay, goodbye. Okay. No, go back.
Okay. Oh my god, could you see me eating? Oh my god. Oh. I hope not. I'm just gonna pretend no one's gonna watch this. I keep having to tell myself that. Oh boy. Because it's not polite to eat on camera. Unless that is what you're doing. Unless like I think like unless you're doing mukbang or whatever. Like unless that's the format, I feel as though it's just impolite to be seen eating on camera. Hold on a second. That's another thing. You should cover your mouth when you burp. As well as cover your mouth when you yawn. Those are forms of etiquette that I learned as a child. And through most of my life, I've completely ignored them. I'm just joking. Most of my life, I would say I followed them to a T, if not overly overdone it to some extent. But in the last like maybe 10 years of my life, not 10, last like 6 or 8 years of my life, I loosened up on it a little bit. And then I met my fiance's family, where all of the and the women in this family are burping champions. Are burping champions. I have never seen people who burp with such gusto and like passion. And it impressed me so much. So goofy. But anyway, whatever. Well, let's get started. Let's move on. You know, not their mom though, just the girls. Not their mom. The mom is I think her mom probably has more stereotypical manners. And I'm sure all of the girls would like not burp like that. In depending on the company they're in. But around the house, oh, they let it rip. They just rip a dip, just fucking trumpets over here. Okay. Not my fiance though. You know, I never thought about that. Anyway, okay. So the development of the mass strike movement in Russia. This is a long section. The mass strike, as it appears for the most part in the discussion in Germany, is a very clear and simply thought out, sharply sketched, isolated phenomenon. It is the political mass strike exclusively that is spoken of. That what is meant by it is a single grand rising of the industrial proletariat, springing from what is meant by it is a single grand rising of the industrial proletariat springing from some political motive of the highest importance, and undertaking on the basis of an opportune and mutual understanding on the part of the controlling authorities of the new party and of the trade unions, and carried through in the spirit of party discipline and in perfect order. And in still more perfect order, brought to the directing committees as a signal given at the proper time, by which committees, the regulation of support, the cost, the sacrifice, in a word, the whole material balance of the strike is exactly determined in advance. I decided to get more coffee with almond milk, and it is making me mucusy, and that is a disappointment. An unfortunate disappointment. My hair is so purple. Look at that. It's cool. I kind of look like my profile picture, which is nice. Oh well. My hair used to be more purple, but I'm getting distracted. Hold on. Okay. The trade unions. Right. So it's like a really specific tactical move, which under the right circumstance is initiated by the highest authorities within the party and the unions and the like working classes, as like a very specific and planned and organized kind of like action against the bourgeoisie, the bourgeois society. Sorry. Now, when we compare this theoretical scheme with the real mass strike as it appeared in Russia 5 years ago, We are compelled to say that this representation, which in German discussion occupies the central position, hardly corresponds to a single one of the many mass strikes that have taken place. And on the other hand, that the mass strike in Russia displays such a multiplicity of the most varied forms of action that it is altogether impossible to speak of the mass strike, of an abstract, schematic mass strike. All the factors of the mass strike, as well as its character, are not only different in the different towns and districts of the country, but its general character has often changed in the course of the revolution. The mass strike has passed through a definite history in Russia and is passing still further through it. Who, therefore, speaks of the mass strike in Russia must, above all things, keep its history before his eyes. The present official period, so to speak, of the Russian Revolution is justly dated from the rising of the proletariat on January 22nd, 1905, when the demonstration of 200,000 workers ended in a frightful bloodbath before the Tsar's palace. The bloody massacre in St. Petersburg was, as is well known, the signal for the outbreak of the first gigantic series of mass strikes, which spread over the whole of Russia within the first few days, and which carried the call to action of the revolution from St. Petersburg to every corner of the empire, and amongst the widest sections of the proletariat. But the St. Petersburg Rising of January 22nd was only the critical moment of a mass strike, which the proletariat of the Tsarist capital had previously entered upon in January 1905. The January mass strike was without a doubt carried through under the immediate influence of the gigantic general strike, which in December 1904 broke out in the caucus in Baku, and for a long time kept the whole of Russia in suspense. The events of December in Baku were, on their part, only the last and powerful ramifications of those tremendous mass strikes which, like a periodic earthquake, shook the whole of South Russia, and whose prologue was the mass strike in Batum in the Caucasus in March 1902. This first mass strike movement in the continuous series of present revolutionary eruptions is finally separated by 5 or 6 years from the great general strike of the textile workers in St. Petersburg in 1896 and 1897. And this movement is apparently separated from the present revolution by a few years of apparent stagnation and strong reaction. Everyone who knows the inner political development of the Russian proletariat to their present stage of class consciousness and revolutionary energy will realize that the history of the present period of the mass struggles begins with those general strikes in St. Petersburg. They are therefore important for the problems of the mass strike because they already contain in the germ all principal factors of the later mass strikes. Again, the St. Petersburg General Strike of 1896 appears as a purely economic, partial wage struggle. Its causes were the intolerable working conditions of the spinners and weavers in St. Petersburg, a working day of 13, 14, or 15 hours, miserable piecework rates, and a whole series of contemptible chicaneries on the part of the employers. The workers, however, patiently endured this condition of things for a long time till, in an apparently trivial circumstance, filled the cup to overflowing. The coronation of the present Tsar, Nicholas II, which had been postponed for 2 years through fear of the revolutionaries, was celebrated in 1896, and on that occasion the St. Petersburg employers displayed their patriotic zeal by giving their workers 3 days compulsory holidays, for which, curious to relate, they did not desire to pay their employees. The workers, angered by this, began to move. After a conference of about 300 of the intelligent workers in the Ekaterinhof garden, a strike was decided upon, and the following demands were formulated. First, payment of wages for the coronation holidays. Second, a working day of 10 hours. Third, increased rates for piecework. Increased rates for piecework. This happened on May 24th, in a week, every weaving and spinning establishment was at a standstill, and 40,000 workers were in the general strike. Today, this event, measured by the gigantic mass strike of the revolution, may appear a little thing in the political polar rigidity of the Russia of that time. A general strike was something unheard of. It was even a complete revolution in little. There began, of course, the most brutal persecution. About 1,000 workers were arrested, and the general strike was suppressed. Oh, this is such a big section. Here already we see all the fundamental characteristics of the later mass strikes. The next occasion of the movement was wholly accidental and even unimportant, its outbreak elementary. But in the success of the movement, the fruits of the agitation extended over several years. Of the social democracy were seen, and in the course of the general strike, the social democratic agitators stood at the head of the movement, directed it, and used it to stir up revolutionary agitation. Further, the strike was outwardly a merely economic struggle for wages, but the attitude of the government and the agitation of the social democracy made it a political phenomenon of the first rank. And lastly, the strike was suppressed. The workers suffered a defeat. But in January of the following year, the textile workers of St. Petersburg repeated the general strike once more and achieved this time a remarkable success. The legal introduction of a working day of 11 hours throughout the whole of Russia. What was nevertheless a much more important result was this: since the first strike of 1896, which was entered upon without a trace of organization or of strike funds, an intensive trade union fight began in Russia proper, which spread from St. Petersburg to the other parts of the country and opened up entirely new vistas to social democratic agitation and organization. And by which to the apparently death-like peace of the following period, the revolution was prepared by underground work. The outbreak of the Caucasian strike in March 1902 was apparently as accidental and as much due to pure economic partial causes, although produced by quite other factors, as that of 1896. It was connected with a serious industrial and commercial crisis, which in Russia was the precursor of the Japanese War, and which, together with it, was the most powerful factor of the nascent revolutionary ferment. The crisis produced an enormous mass of unemployment which nourished the agitation amongst the proletarian masses, and therefore the government, to restore tranquility amongst the workers, undertook to transport the superfluous hands in batches to their respective home districts. One such measure, which was to affect about 400 petroleum workers, called forth a mass protest in Batum, which led to demonstrations, arrests, a massacre, and finally to a political trial in which the purely economic and partial affair suddenly became a political and revolutionary event. The reverberation of the wholly fruitless, expiring, and suppressed strike in Batum was a series of revolutionary mass demonstrations of workers in Nizhny Novgorod, Saratov, and other towns, and therefore a mighty surge forward of the general wave of the revolutionary movement. Already in November 1902, the first genuine revolutionary echo followed in the shape of a general strike in Rostov-on-Don, Dispute about the rates of pay in workshops of the Vladikavkaz Railway gave the impetus to this movement. The management sought to reduce wages, and therefore the Dawn Committee of Social Democracy issued a proclamation with a summons to strike for the following demands: a 9-hour day, increase in wages, abolition of fines, dismissal of obnoxious engineers, etc. Entire railway workshops participated in the strike. Presently, all other industries joined in, and suddenly an unprecedented state of affairs revealed in Rostov. Every industrial work was at a standstill, and everyday monster meetings of 15 to 20,000 were held in open air, sometimes surrounded by a cordon of Cossacks, at which, for the first time, Social Democratic popular speakers appeared publicly. Inflammatory speeches on socialism and political freedom were delivered and received with immense enthusiasm. And revolutionary appeals were distributed by tens of thousands of copies. In the midst of rigid absolutist Russia, the proletariat of Rostov won for the first time the right of assembly and freedom of speech by storm. It goes without saying that there was a massacre here. The dispute over wages in Vladikavkaz's railway workshops grew in few days into political general strikes and a revolutionary street battle. As an echo of this, there followed immediately a general strike at the station of Tikhoretskaya on the same railway. Here also a massacre took place and also a trial, and thus even Tikhoretskaya has taken its place as an indissoluble chain of factors of the revolution. In the spring of 1903, gave an answer to the defeated strikes in Rostov and Tikhoretskaya. The whole of southern Russia on May, June, and July was aflame. Baku, Tiflis, Batum, Elizaveta, Odessa, Kiev, Nikolaev, Ekaterinslav were in a general strike in the literal meaning of those words. But here again, the movement did not arise on any preconceived plan from one another. It flowed together from individual points in which one from different causes, points in each one from different causes and in a different form. The beginning was made by Baku, where several partial wage struggles in individual factories and departments culminated in a general strike. In Tiflis, the strike was begun by 2,000 commercial employees who had a working day from 6 o'clock in the morning to 11 at night. On the 4th of July, they all left their shops and made a circuit of the town to demand from the proprietors of the shops that they close their premises. The victory was complete. The commercial employees won a working day from 8 in the morning to 8 in the evening, and all factories, workshops, and offices, etc., immediately joined. The newspapers did not appear. The tramway traffic could not be carried on under military protection. The newspapers did not appear, and tramway traffic could not be carried on under military protection. Okay. In Elisavetgrad on July 4th, a strike began in all factories with purely economic demands. And these were mostly conceded, and the strike ended on the 14th. 2 weeks later, however, it broke out again. The bakers this time gave the word, and the bricklayers, the joiners, the dyers, the mill workers, and finally all factory workers joined them. In Odessa, the movement began with a wage struggle in the course of which the Legal Workers Union, founded by government agents according to the program of the famous Gendarm Zubtov, was developed. Historical dialectics had again seized the occasion to play one of its malicious little pranks. The economic struggles of the early period, amongst them the Great St. Petersburg General Strike in 1896, had misled Russian social democracy into exaggerating the importance of so-called economics, and in this way the ground had been prepared amongst the workers for the demagogic activities of Zubtov. After a time, however, the great revolutionary stream turned around the little ship with the false flag and compelled it to ride compels it to ride right at the head of the revolutionary proletarian flotilla. The Zubatovian unions gave the signal for the Great Red General strikes in Odessa in the spring of 1904, and as for the general strikes in St. Petersburg in January 1906, and as for the the workers of Odessa, who were not to be deceived by the appearance of friendliness on the part of the government for the workers and of its sympathy with purely economic strikes, suddenly demanded proof by example and compelled the Zubatovian Workers' Union in a factory to declare a strike for very moderate demands. They were immediately thrown onto the street, and when they demanded the protection of the authorities, which was promised them by their leader, the gentlemen vanished and left the workers in the wildest excitement. The Social Democrats at one point placed themselves at the head of affairs, and the strike movement extended to other factories. On the first day of July, 2,500 dockers struck work for an increase of wages from 8 kopecks to 2 rubles, and the shortening of the workday by half an hour. On the 16th day of July, the seamen joined the movement. On the 13th day, the tramway staff began a strike. Then a meeting took place of all the strikers, 7,000 or 8,000 men. They formed a procession which went from factory to factory, growing like an avalanche, and presently a crowd of 40 to 50,000 betook themselves to the docks in order to bring all work there to a standstill. General strike soon reigned throughout the whole city. In Kiev, a strike began in the railway workshops on July 21st. Here also, the immediate cause was miserable conditions of labor, and wage demands were presented. On the following day, the foundry men followed the example. On July 23rd, an incident occurred which gave the signal for the general strike. During the night, 2 delegates of the railwaymen were arrested. The strikers immediately demanded their release, and as this was not conceded, they decided not to allow trains to leave the town. At the station, the strikers, with their wives and families, sat down on the railway tracks, a sea of human beings. They were threatened with rifle salvos. The workers bared their breasts and cried, "Shoot." A salvo was fired into the defenseless, seated crowd, and 30 to 40 corpses, among them women and children, remained on the ground. On this becoming known, the whole town of Kiev went on strike on the same day. The corpses of the murdered workers were raised on high by the crowd and carried around in a mass demonstration. Meetings, speeches, arrests, isolated street fights, Kiev was in the midst of the revolution. The movement was soon at an end, but the printers had won a shortening of the workday by 1 hour and a wage increase of 1 ruble. In a yeast factory, the 8-hour day was introduced. The railway workshops were closed by order of the ministry. Other departments continued partial strikes for their demands. In Nikolaev, the general strike broke out under the immediate influence of news from Odessa, Baku, Batum, and Tiflis. In spite of the opposition of the Social Democratic Committee, who wanted to postpone the outbreak of the movement till the time came when the military should have left the town for maneuvers, the masses refused to hold back. One factory made a beginning. The strikes went from one workshop to another. The resistance of the military only poured oil on the fire. Mass processions with revolutionary songs were formed in which all workers, employees, tramway officials, men and women took part. The cessation of work was complete. In Ekaterinoslav, the bakers came out on strike on August 5th. On the 7th, the men of the railway workshops, and then all other factories on August 8th. Tramway traffic stopped, and the newspapers did not appear. Thus, the colossal general strike in South Russia came into being in the summer of 1903. By many small channels of partial economic struggles and little accidental occurrences, it flowed rapidly to a raging sea and changed the entire south of the Tsarist Empire for some weeks into a bizarre revolutionary workers' republic. Brotherly embraces, cries of delight and of enthusiasm, songs of freedom, merry laughter, humor, and joy were seen and heard in the crowd of many thousands of persons which surged through the town from morning till evening. The mood was exalted. One could almost believe that a new, better life was beginning on earth. The most solemn and at the same time an idyllic, moving spectacle. So wrote, at the time, the correspondent of the liberal Osvobenj of Peter Straub. The year 1904 brought with it war and, for the first time, an interval of quiet in the mass strike movement. At first, a troubled wave of patriotic demonstrations arranged by the police authorities spread over the country. The liberal bourgeois society was, for the time being, struck to the ground by the Tsarist official chauvinism. But soon, social democrats took possession of the arena. Revolutionary workers' demonstrations were opposed to the demonstrations of the patriotic lumpen proletariat, which were organized under police patronage. Revolutionary workers' demonstrations were opposed to demonstrations of patriotic lumpen proletariat, which were organized under police patronage, of course. At last, the shameful defeats of the Tsarist army woke the liberal society from its lethargy and began the era of democratic congresses, banquets, speeches, addresses, and manifestos. Absolutism, temporarily suppressed through the disgrace of war, gave full scope to these gentlemen, and by they saw everything in rosy colors. For 6 months, bourgeois liberalism occupied the center of the stage, and the proletariat remained in the shadows. But after a long depression, absolutism again aroused itself, and Camarilla gathered all its strength, and by a single powerful movement of the Cossacks' heel, the whole liberal movement was driven into a corner. Banquets, speeches, and congresses were prohibited out of hand as intolerable presumption. And liberalism suddenly found itself at the end of its tether. Interesting. But exactly at the point where liberalism was exhausted, the action of the proletariat began. In December 1904, the Great General Strike due to unemployment broke out in Baku. The working class was again on the field of battle. As speech was forbidden and rendered impossible, action began. In Baku, for some weeks in the midst of the general strike, the Social Democrats ruled as absolute masters of the situation. And the peculiar events of December in the Caucasus would have caused an immediate sensation if they had not been so quickly put in the shade by the rising tide of the revolution. The fantastic confused news of the general strike in Baku had not reached all parts of the Tsarist Empire when in January 1905 the mass strike in St. Petersburg broke out. Here also, as is well known, the immediate cause was trivial. 2 men employed at the Putilov Putlov works, were discharged on account of their membership in the legal Zubotovian Union. This measure called forth a solidarity strike on January 16th of the whole of the 12,000 employed in this works. The Social Democrats seized the occasion of the strike to begin a lively agitation for the extension of the demands and set forth demands for the 8-hour day and right of combination, freedom of speech and of the press, etc. The unrest among the Putlov workers communicated itself quickly to the remainder of the proletariat, and in a few days, 140,000 workers were on strike. Joint conferences and stormy discussions led to the working out of that proletarian charter of bourgeois freedom, with the 8-hour day at its head, with which, on January 22nd, 200,000 workers led by Father Gapon marched to the Tsar's palace. The conflict of the two Putlov workers, who had been subjected to disciplinary punishment, had changed within a week into the prologue of the most violent revolution in modern times. Wow. The events that followed upon this are well known. The bloodbath in St. Petersburg called forth gigantic mass strikes and general strike in the month of January and February in all industrial centers and towns in Russia, Poland, Lithuania, and the Baltic provinces, the Caucasus, Siberia, from north to south and east to west. On closer inspection, however, it can be seen that the mass strike was appearing in other forms than those of the previous period. Everywhere at that time, the social democratic organizations went before with appeals. Everywhere was revolutionary solidarity with the St. Petersburg proletariat expressly stated as the cause and aim of the general strike. Everywhere, at the same time, there were demonstrations, speeches, conflicts with the military. But even here, there was no predetermined plan, no organized action, because the appeals of the parties could scarcely keep pace with the spontaneous risings of the masses. The leadership had scarcely time to formulate the watchwords of the onrushing crowd of the proletariat. Further, the earlier mass and general strikes had originated from individual coalescing wage struggles, which, in the general temper of the revolutionary situation and under the influence of the social democratic agitation, rapidly became political demonstrations. The economic factor and the scattered condition of trade unionism were the starting point, all embracing class action and political direction the result. The movement was now reversed. The general strike of January and February broke out as unified revolutionary actions to begin with under the direction of the Social Democrats. But this action soon fell into an unending series of local, partial economic strikes in separate districts, towns, departments, and factories. Throughout the whole of the spring of 1905 and into the middle of the summer, there fermented throughout the whole of the immense empire an uninterrupted economic strike of almost the entire proletariat against capital, a struggle which caught on the one hand all the petty bourgeois and liberal professions, commercial employees, technicians, actors, and members of the artistic professions, and on the other hand, penetrated to the domestic servants, the minor police officials, and even the stratum of the lumpen proletariat, simultaneously surged from the towns to the country districts and even knocked on the iron gates of the military barracks. That's intense. This is a gigantic, many-colored picture of a general arrangement of labor and capital which reflects all the complexity of the social organization of the political consciousness of every section and of every district. And the whole long scale runs from the regular trade union struggles of a picketed and tested troop of the proletariat, drawn from the large-scale industry, to the foremost protest of a handful of rural proletarians and to the first slight stirrings of the agitated military garrison, from the well-educated and elegant revolt in cuffs and white collars in the counting-house of the bank to the shy, bold murmurings of a clumsy meeting of dissatisfied policemen in a smoke-grimmed, dark, and dirty guard-room. According to the theory of the lovers of ordinarily and well-disciplined struggles, according to plan and scheme, according to those especially who always ought to know better from afar how it should have been done, the decay of the great political general strike on January 1905 into a number of economic struggles was probably a great mistake, which crippled the action and changed it into a straw fire. But social democracy in Russia, which had taken part in the revolution but had not made it, and which had even to learn its law from its course itself, was the first glance put out of countenance for a time by the apparently fruitless ebb of the storm flood of the general strike. History, however, which had made that great mistake, thereby accomplished, heedless of heedless of the reasonings of its officious schoolmaster, a gigantic work of the revolution, which was as inevitable as it was in consequences incalculable. The sudden general rising of the proletariat in January under the powerful impetus of the St. Petersburg events was outwardly a political act of the revolutionary declaration of war on absolutism. But this first general direct action reacted inwardly all the more powerfully, as it for the first time awoke class feeling and class consciousness in millions upon millions as if by an electric shock. And this awakening of class feeling expressed itself forthwith in the circumstances of the proletarian mass, counted by millions, quite suddenly and sharply came to realize how intolerable was that social and economic existence which they had patiently endured for decades in the chains of capitalism. Thereupon there began a spontaneous general striking of and tugging at these chains. All the innumerable sufferings of the modern proletariat reminded them of the old bleeding wounds. Here was the 8-hour day fought for. There piecework was resisted. Here were brutal foremen driven off in a sack on a hand car. At another place, infamous systems of fines were fought against. Everywhere better wages were striven for, and here and there the abolition of homework. Abolition of homework. I'm all for it. Yeah, let's abolish homework. I'm joking. That's the child in me. Uh, remembering the pain of homework. Backward, degraded occupations in large towns, small provincial towns, which had hitherto dreamed in an idyllic sleep, the village with its legacy from feudalism, all these, suddenly awakened by the January lightning, bethought themselves of their rights, and now sought feverishly to make up for their previous neglect. Here, the economic struggle was not really a decay, a dispassion of action, but merely change of front, a sudden and natural alteration of the first general engagement with absolutism in a general reckoning with capital, which, in keeping with its character, assumed the form of individual, scattered wage struggles. Political class action was not broken in January by the decay of the general strike into economic strikes, but the reverse. After the possible content of the political action in the given situation and at the given stage of the revolution was exhausted, it broke or rather changed into economic action. I'll read that again. Hold on. I'm definitely not finishing this before I have to go to my reading group. But I have to remind myself that it is okay and that it does not necessarily mean that I am an utter failure and that I deserve to feel like a piece of shit. All right, let's keep going. Here, the economic struggle was not really a decay, a dissipation of action, but merely change of front, a sudden and natural alteration of the first general engagement with absolutism, and a general reckoning with capital, which, in keeping with its character, assumed the form of individual, scattered wage struggles. Political class action was not broken in January by the decay of the general strike into economic strikes, but the reverse. After the possible content of political action in the given situation and at the given stage of the revolution was exhausted, it broke and rather changed into economic action. In point of fact, what more could the general strike in January have achieved? Only complete thoughtlessness could expect that absolutism could be destroyed at one blow by a single long-drawn general strike after the anarchist plan. Absolutism in Russia must be overthrown by the proletariat. In order to be able to overthrow it, the proletariat requires a high degree of political education, of class consciousness and organization. All these conditions cannot be fulfilled by pamphlets and leaflets, but only by the living political school, by the fight, in the fight, in the continuous course of the revolution. Further, absolutism cannot be overthrown at any desired moment in which only adequate exertion and endurance is necessary. The fall of absolutism is merely the outer expression of the inner social and class development of Russian society. Before absolutism can, and so far that it may, be overthrown, the bourgeois Russia in its interior, in its modern class divisions, must be formed. This requires the drawing together of the various social layers and interests beside the education of the proletarian and revolutionary parties, and not less of the liberal, radical, petty bourgeois, conservative, and reactionary parties. It requires self-consciousness, self-knowledge, and the class consciousness not merely of the layers of the people, but also of the layers of the bourgeoisie. But this can also be achieved and come to fruition in no way but in the struggle. In the process of revolution itself, through the actual school of experience, in collision with the proletarian as well as with one another, in incessant mutual friction. This class division and class maturity of bourgeois society, as well as its action in the struggle against absolutism, is on the one hand hampered and made difficult by the peculiar leading role of the proletariat, and on the other hand, is spurred on and accelerated. The various undercurrents of the social process of the revolution cross one another, check one another, and increase the internal contradictions of the revolution, but in the end accelerate and thereby render still more violent its eruptions. This apparently simple and purely mechanical problem may therefore be stated thus. The overthrow of absolutism is a long, continuous social process, and its solution demands a complete undermining of the soil of society. The uppermost part be placed lowest, and the lowermost part highest. The apparent order must be changed into a chaos, and the apparently anarchistic chaos must be changed into a new order. I'm reading that again, that's for sure. This apparently simple and purely mechanical problem may therefore be stated thus. The overthrow of absolutism is a long, continuous social process, and its solution demands a complete undermining of the soil of society. The uppermost part must be placed lowest, and the lowermost part highest. The apparent order must be changed to a chaos, and the apparent anarchistic chaos must be changed into a new order. Now, this process of the social transformation of old Russia, not only the January lightning of the first general strike, but also the spring and summer thunderstorms that followed it, played an indispensable part. The embittered general relations of wage labor and capital contributed in equal measure to the drawing together of various layers of the people and those of the bourgeoisie to the class consciousness of the revolutionary proletariat and to that of the liberal and conservative bourgeoisie. And just as the urban wage struggle contributed to the formation of a strong monarchist industrial party in Moscow, so the conflagration of the violent rural rising in Livonia led to the rapid liquidation of the famous aristocratic agrarian Zemstvo liberalism. Zemstvo, that's an interesting. Zemstvo. It just doesn't seem right. I don't know if I'm clearly not pronouncing that correctly. Led to the rapid liquidation of the famous aristocratic agrarian Zemstvo liberalism. But at the same time, the period of the economic struggles in the spring and summer of 1905 made it possible for the urban proletariat, by means of active social democratic agitation and direction, to assimilate later all the lessons of the January prologue and to grasp clearly all the further tasks of the revolution. There was connected to this, too, another circumstance of an enduring social character, a general raising of the standard of life of the proletariat, economic, social, and intellectual. The January strikes of 1905 ended victoriously almost throughout. As proof of this, some data from the enormous and still for the most part inaccessible mass of material may be cited here relating to a few of the more important strikes carried through in Warsaw alone by the Social Democrats of Poland and Lithuania. In the great factories of the metal industry at Warsaw, Lotos, lots of different companies, Run and Son, what a name for a company. Metal industry, whatever. Great factories of the metal industry of Warsaw. 22 factories in all. The workers won after a strike of 4 or 5 weeks. A 9-hour day, a 25% increase of wages, and obtained very small concessions. In the large workshops of the timber industry of Warsaw, I'm not going to read all the names, 12 workshops in all, the strikes had won by the 23rd of February, the 9-hour day, which they also won, together with an increase in wages after a further week of strike. The further strike of a week. The entire bricklaying industry began a strike on... Whoa! What happened? Why did it suddenly go all the way to the bottom of the page? Oh my god. Yeah.
Hello, those on the live stream.
Hello. There's no one in the live stream. And probably no one will watch this. At least I certainly hope they don't. Kind of.
Can't you like have it not listed?
No, because then no. You gotta understand. There has to be the potentiality. Like without that, it's not. It just doesn't work. Like it doesn't. I don't actually need people to see it. I just need to believe people could see it. If I made it unlisted, I can't believe that anyone would see it, even if I don't want people to see it. Just because I don't want people to see it doesn't mean I want to prevent them from seeing it. It's because possibility has an actuality of its own, right? You know?
Yeah, I guess you.
Okay, for sure.
I'm just getting ready to go.
My throat is like sore. Well, it's not sore. It's just tired. I'm tired from reading out loud. My love, give me a hug.
I can't wait till I'm done putting on my shoes.
Yes. I'm just checking. Let's see here.
Carry on, my love.
Yes, indeed. The entire bricklaying industry began a strike on February 27th and demanded, in conformity with the watchword of social democracy, the 8-hour day. They won the 10-hour day on March 11th, together with an increase of wages for all categories, regular weekly payment of wages, etc. The painters, the cartwrights, and the saddlers, and the smiths all won 8-hour day without decrease of wages. The telephone workshops struck for 10 days and won the 8-hour day and an increase of wages of 10 to 15%. The large linen weaving establishment of Heelen and Dietrich, 10,000 workers, after a strike lasting 9 weeks, obtained a decrease of the working day by 1 hour and a wage increase of 5 to 10%. And similar results in endless variation were seen in the older branches of industry in Warsaw, Lodz, and Sosnowiec. In Russia proper, the 8-hour...
Sorry, I think we're going to be leaving right now.
Okay.
Talk to you later.
Okay. In Russia proper, the 8-hour day was won in December 1904 by a few categories of oil workers in Baku. In May 1905 by the sugar workers of the Kiev district. In January 1905, all the printing works in Samara where at the same time an increase of piecework rates was obtained and fines were abolished. In February, in the factory in which medical instruments were for the army are manufactured, and a furniture factory, and in the cartridge factory in St. Petersburg. Further, the 8-hour day was introduced in the mines of Vladivostok in March in the government mechanical workshop dealing with government stock, and in May among the employees of the Tiflis Electric Town Railway. In the same month, a working day of 8.5 hours was introduced in the large cotton weaving factory of Morozov And at the same time, the abolition of night work and the wage increase of 8% were won. In June, on an 8-hour day and a few oil works in St. Petersburg and Moscow. In July, a working day of 8.5. I'm sorry. Okay. I get it. 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 There were a lot of little economic victories. A lot. A whole slew of them. In different parts of the Russian economy, in different parts of the Russian world, of varying degrees and whatnot. I understand that it was probably very important at the time to go through and list all the different victories that were achieved. I am going to scan through this, and I'm going to probably skip ahead to where we begin to reintroduce a discussion of the revolution, like the developments of the revolutionary struggle and class struggle in general, and its implications. Because all of this is just like these are paragraphs after paragraphs, just listing the different things that the workers want, and that is honestly really cool. But also, I have limited time. So I need to think about that when thinking about this. Ooh, piecework rate. It's an increase of time rates, 20% in piecework rates. Okay, I'll be right back. Okay. Okay. Let's keep going. It goes without saying that these concessions were withdrawn again, and it goes without saying that these concessions were withdrawn again. Now here, now there. This, however, was only the cause of renewed strife and led to still more bitter struggles for revenge, and thus the period of the spring of 1905 has of itself become the prologue to the endless series of ever-spreading, interlacing economic struggles which have lasted to the present day. In the period of the outward stagnation of the revolution, when the telegraph carried no sensational news from the Russian theater of war to the outside world, when the West European laid aside his newspaper in disappointment with the remark there was nothing doing in Russia. The great underground work of the revolution was in reality being carried out without cessation, day by day and hour by hour, in the very heart of the empire. The incessant, intensive economic struggle effected by rapid and abbreviated methods, the transition of capitalism from the stage of primitive accumulation, patriarchal, unmethodical methods of working, to a highly modern, civilized one. At the present time, the actual working day in Russian industry leaves behind not only the Russian factory legislation, that is the legal working day of 11 hours, but even the actual conditions of Germany. In most departments of large-scale industry in Russia, the 10-hour day prevails, which in Germany is declared in social legislation to be an unattainable goal. And what is more, that longed for industrial constitutionalism, which there is so much enthusiasm in Germany, and for the sake of which the advocates of opportunist tactics would keep ever keen wind from the stagnant waters of their all-suffering parliamentarism, has already been born together with political constitutionalism in the midst of the revolutionary storm from the revolution itself. In actual fact, it is not merely a general raising of the standard of life or the cultural level of the working class that has taken place. The material standard of life as a permanent stage of well-being has no place in the revolution. The material standpoint of life as a permanent stage of well-being has no place in the revolution. Interesting. In actual fact, it is not merely a general raising of the standard of life or the cultural level of the working class that has taken place. The material standard of life as a permanent stage of well-being has no place in the revolution. Full of contradictions and contrasts, it brings simultaneously surprising economic victories and the most brutal acts of revenge on the part of the capitalists. Today, the 8-hour day, and tomorrow, wholesale lockouts and actual starvation for the millions. The most precious, lasting thing in the rapid ebb and flow of the wave is its mental sediments. The intellectual, cultural growth of the proletariat, which proceeds by fits and starts, and which offers an inviolable guarantee of their further irresistible progress in the economic as well as political struggle. And not only that, even the relations of the worker to the employer are turned around. Since the January general strike and the strikes of 1905, which followed upon it, the principle of the capitalist mastery of the house is de facto abolished. In the larger factories of all important industrial centers, the establishment of worker committees has, as if by itself, taken place, with which alone the employer negotiates and which decides all disputes. And finally, another thing. The apparently chaotic strike and the disorganized revolutionary action after the January general strike are becoming the starting point of the feverish work of organization. Hold on. Okay. All right, let's see here. The most precious, lasting thing in the rapid ebb and flow of the wave is its mental sediments. The intellectual, cultural growth of the proletariat, which proceeds by fits and starts, and which offers an inviolable guarantee of their further irresistible progress in the economic as well as the political struggle. And not only that, even the relations of the worker to the employer are turned around. Since the January general strike and the strikes of 1905, which followed upon it, the principle of the capitalist mastery of the house is de facto abolished. In the larger factories of all important industrial centers, the establishment of workers' committees has, as if by itself, taken place, with which alone the employer negotiates and which decides all disputes. And finally, another thing, the apparently chaotic strikes and the disorganized revolutionary action after the January general strike are becoming the starting point of a feverish work of organization. Dame history from afar, smiling hoaxes, the bureaucratic lay figures who keep grim watch at the gate over the fate of the German trade unions. The firm organizations, which, as the indispensable hypothesis for an eventual German mass strike, should be fortified like an impregnable citadel. These organizations are in Russia, on the contrary, already born from the mass strike. And while the guardians of the German trade unions, for the most part, fear that the organizations will fall in pieces in a revolutionary whirlwind like rare porcelain, the Russian Revolution shows us the exact opposite picture. From the whirlwind and the storm, out of the fire and the glow of the mass strike, and the street fighting, rise again like Venus from the foam, fresh, young, powerful, buoyant trade unions. Here again, a little example, which, however, is typical of the whole empire. At the second conference of the Russian trade unions, which took place at the end of February 1906 in St. Petersburg, the representative of the Petersburg trade unions, in his report on the development of trade union organizations at the Tsarist capital, said, January 22nd, 1905, which washed away the Gapon Union, was the turning point. The workers in large numbers have learned by experience to appreciate and understand the importance of organization, and that they themselves can create these organizations. The first trade union, that of the printers, originated in direct connection with the January movement. The commission appointed to work out the tariffs framed the statutes, and on July 19th, the union began its existence. Just about this time, the Union of Office Workers and Bookkeepers was called into existence. In addition to those organizations which extend almost openly, there arose from January to October 1905 semi-legal and illegal trade unions. To the former belonged, for example, the Union of Chemists, Assistants, and Commercial Employees. Amongst the illegal unions, special attention must be drawn to the Watchmakers Union, whose first secret session was held on April 24th. All attempts to convene a general open meeting were shattered on the obstinate resistance of the police and the employers in the form of the Chamber of Commerce. This mischance has not prevented the existence of the union. The Tailors and Tailoresses Union was founded in 1905 at a meeting in a wood in which 70 tailors were present. After the question of forming the union was discussed, a commission was appointed, which was entrusted with the task of working out the statutes. All attempts of the commission to obtain a legal existence for the union were unsuccessful. Its activities were confined to agitation and the enrolling of new members in the individual workshops. A similar fate was in store for the Shoemakers Union. In July, a secret night meeting was convened in a wood near the city. Over 100 shoemakers attended. A report was read on the importance of trade unionism, on its history in Western Europe, and its tasks in Russia. It was then decided to form a trade union. A commission of 12 was appointed to work out the statutes and call a general meeting of shoemakers. The statutes were drawn up, but in the meantime, it had not found possible to print them, nor had the general meeting been convened. I'm still mucusy. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. It's just fate. Fate has granted me mucus. It has mucused me. It has filled me with snot. That's not a very pleasant sentence. That's not a very pleasant image. Sorry about that. Let's see here. These are the first difficult beginnings. Then came the October days and the second general strike, the Tsar's manifesto of October 30th and the brief constitution period. The workers threw themselves with fiery zeal into the waves of political freedom in order to use it forthwith for the purpose of the work of organization. Besides daily political meetings, debates, and the formation of clubs, the development of trade unionism was immediately taken in hand. In October and November, 40 new trade unions appeared in St. Petersburg. Presently, a central bureau, that is, a trade union council, was established. Various trade union papers appeared, and since November, a central organ has been published, the Trade Union. What was reported above concerning Petersburg was also true on the whole of Moscow and Odessa, and Kiev and Nikolaev, Saratov, Voronezh, I'm not sure how to say that, Samara, Nizhny Novgorod, and all the larger towns of Russia, and to a still higher degree in Poland. The trade unions of different towns seek contact with one another, and conferences are held. The end of the Constitution period and the return to reaction in December 1905 put a stop for the time being to the open, widespread activity of the trade unions, but did not, however, altogether extinguish them. They operate as organizations in secret and occasionally carry on quite open wage struggles. A peculiar mixture of the legal and illegal condition of trade union life is being built up, corresponding to the highly contradictory revolutionary situation. But in the midst of the struggle, the work of organization is being more widely extended. In a thoroughgoing, and not to say pedantic fashion, the trade unions of the Social Democracy of Poland and Lithuania, for example, which at the last Congress in July 1906 were represented by 5 delegates from a membership of 10,000, are furnished with the usual statuettes, printed membership cards, adhesive stamps, etc., and the same bankers and shoemakers, engineers, and printers of Warsaw and Lodz, who in June 1905 stood on the barricades and in December only awaited the word from Petersburg to begin street fighting, find time and are eager, between one mass strike and another, between prison and lockout, and under the conditions of a siege, to go into their trade union statutes and discuss them earnestly. These barricade fighters of yesterday and tomorrow have indeed more than once at meetings severely reprimanded their leaders and threatened them with withdrawal from the party because the unlucky trade union membership cards could not be printed quickly enough. In secret, printing works under incessant police persecution. This zeal and this earnestness continue to this day. For example, in the first 2 weeks of the July 1906, 15 new trade unions appeared in Ekaterinoslav, 6 in Kostroma, several in Kiev, Poltava, Smolensk, Cherkasy, Proskorvo, down to the most insignificant provincial town. In the session of the Moscow Trade Union Council of June 4th this year, after the acceptance of the reports of individual trade union delegates, it was decided that the trade unions should discipline their members and restrain from street rioting because the time is not considered opportune for the mass strike. In the face of possible provocation on the part of the government, care should be taken that the masses do not stream out into the streets. Finally, the council decided that if at any time one trade union began a strike, the others should hold back from any wages movement. Most of the economic struggles are now directed by the trade unions. Thus, the great economic struggle which proceeded from the January general strike and which has not ceased to the present day has formed a broad background of the revolution from which, in ceaseless reciprocal action with the political agitation of the external events of the revolution, there ever arise here and there now isolated explosions, and now great sections of the proletariat. Thus, there flame up against this background the following events, one after the other. At the May Day demonstration, there was an unprecedented, absolute general strike in Warsaw, which ended in a bloody encounter between the defenseless crowd and the soldiers. At Lodz in June, a mass outing, which was scattered by the soldiers, led to the demonstration of 100,000 workers at the funeral of some of the victims of the brutal soldiery, and a renewed encounter with the military. And finally, on June 23rd, 24th, and 25th, passed into the first barricade fight in the Tsarist Empire. Similarly, in June, the first great revolt of the sailors of the Black Sea Fleet exploded in the harbor of Odessa from a trifling incident on board the armored vessel Potemkin, which reacted immediately on Odessa and Nikolaev in the form of a violent mass strike. As a further echo, followed the mass strike and the sailors' revolt in Kronstadt, Lbów, and Vladivostok. In the month of October, the grandiose experiment of St. Petersburg was made with the introduction of the 8-hour day. The General Council of Workers delegates decided to achieve the 8-hour day in a revolutionary manner. That means that on the appointed day, all the workers of Petersburg should inform their employers that they are not willing to work more than 8 hours a day and should leave their places of work at the end of the 8 hours. The idea was the occasion of lively agitation, was accepted by the proletariat with enthusiasm and carried out, but very great sacrifices were not thereby avoided. Thus, for example, the 8-hour day meant an enormous fall in wages for the textile workers, who had hitherto worked 11 hours on a system of piecework. This, however, they willingly accepted. Within a week, the 8-hour day prevailed in every factory and workshop in Petersburg, and the joy of the workers knew no bounds. Soon, however, the employers, stupefied at first, prepared their defenses. Everywhere they threatened to close their factories. Some of the workers consented to negotiate and obtain here a working day of 10 hours, and there one of 9 hours. The elite of the Petersburg proletariat, however, the workers in the large government engineering establishments, remained unshaken, and a lockout ensued which threw from 45 to 50,000 men on the street for a month. At the settlement, the 8-hour day movement was carried into the general strike of December, with which the great lockout had hampered to a great extent. Meanwhile, however, the second tremendous general strike throughout the whole empire follows in October, as a reply to the project of the Bulletin Duma, the strike to which the railwaymen gave the summons. This second great action of the proletariat already bears a character essentially different from that of the first one in January. The element of the political consciousness already plays a much bigger role. Here also, to be sure, the immediate occasion for the outbreak of the mass strike was a subordinate and apparently accidental thing. The conflict of the railwaymen and with the management over the pension fund. But the general rising of the industrial proletariat which followed upon it was conducted in accordance with clear political ideas. The prologue of the January strike was a procession to the Tsar to ask for political freedom. The watchword of the October strike ran away with the constitutional comedy of Tsarism. And thanks to the immediate success of the general strike, the Tsar's manifesto of October 30th, the movement does not flow back on itself as in January, but rushes over outwardly in the eager activity of newly acquired political freedom. Demonstrations, meetings, a young press, public discussions, and bloody massacres as the end of the story, and thereupon new mass strikes and demonstrations. Such is the stormy picture of the November and December days. In November, at the insistence of the Social Democrats in Petersburg, the first demonstrative mass strike is arranged as a protest demonstration against the bloody deeds and proclamations of a state of siege in Poland and Livonia. The fermentation after the brief constitutional period and the gruesome awakening finally leads in December to the outbreak of the third general mass strike throughout the empire. This time, its course and its outcome are altogether different from those in the two earlier cases. Political action does not change into economic action as in January, but it no longer achieves a rapid victory as in October. The attempts of the Tsarist camarilla with real political freedom are no longer made, and revolutionary action therewith, for the first time, and along with its whole length, knocked against the strong wall of the physical violence of absolutism. By the logical internal development of progressive experience, the mass strike this time changes into an open insurrection, to armed barricades and street fighting in Moscow. In the December days in Moscow closed the first eventful year of the revolution as the highest point in the ascending line of political action and of the mass strike movement. The Moscow events show a typical picture of the logical development and at the same time of the future of the revolutionary movement on the whole. Their inevitable close in a general upon insurrection, which again on its part cannot come in any other way than through the school of a series of preparatory partial insurrections, which end in the partial outward defeats and considered individually may appear to be premature. The year 1906 brings the elections to the Duma and Duma incidents. The proletariat, from a strong revolutionary instinct and clear knowledge of the situation, boycotts the whole Tsarist constitutional farce, and liberalism again occupies the center stage for a few months. The situation of 1904 appears to have come again, a period of speeches instead of acts, and the proletariat for a time walk in the shadow in order to devote themselves the more diligently to the trade union struggle and the work of the organization. The mass strikes are no longer spoken of, while the clattering rockets of liberal rhetoric are fired off day after day. At last, the Iron Curtain is torn down. The actors are dispersed, and nothing remains of the liberal rockets but smoke and vapor. An attempt of the Central Committee of the Russian Social Democracy to call forth a mass strike as a demonstration for the Duma and a reopening of the period of liberal speech-making falls absolutely flat. The role of the political mass strike alone is exhausted, but at the same time, a transition of the mass strike into a general popular rising is not yet accomplished. The liberal episode is past, the proletarian episode is not yet begun. The stage remains empty for the time being. Okay, I'm gonna end it here. And I'm gonna continue doing some stuff, like looking through this stuff on my own. But that was, I think, good. That was good. To get that history, I think was probably good. Although I almost feel like I could have probably skipped and just done this section on the interaction of the political and economic struggle, because I feel like that is gonna be like a very, very important and essential part of this reading. And I honestly feel like maybe I wasted a little bit of time going through all of that history, but like it is definitely important. It's important. It provides context, kind of filling out of the content. I mean, I don't know, maybe this will probably get into more context and content and history as well, but still, it's good. Anyway, that's it. I'm out. Goodbye. I'm gonna continue reading, but I am done with live streaming and I'm done with my voice. My voice! All right. Yeah. Dunzo. Okay. I will next time, if there is next time. Probably will be. Probably will be. Anyone who watches this is super cool. I'm definitely find you super cool. But whatever. How do I stop it? Oh, there it is. There's a button hiding over there down at the bottom. All right, bye.